Pope Francis is joining the debate over the media, telling Catholic reporters that bad journalism is, quote, a very serious sin. This, says the pontiff, includes disinformation, what some might call fake news, defamation, one-sided reports, sensationalized news, and taking old news that's been dealt with and bringing it back to light today. And we're back with Molly Hemingway. So Pope Francis isn't just calling out bad journalism and saying that these are sins. I mean, I agree with him on the substance. But should he be turning these into religious pronouncements?
Well, it's really an ancient thing to talk about lying being a sin. I mean, it's in the Ten Commandments that you shouldn't lie.
That's a good point.
And Christians and Jews have always understood that to mean much more than just not telling a specific falsehood, but putting the best construction on things, making sure that you're presenting all sides of an argument and being as accurate and fair as you can be. So it's absolutely a sin. And it's interesting that he points it out, because it's not just, when we talk about fake news, I think a lot of people think about people who are willfully and maliciously making things up, but it actually can affect much more than that.
This feels very personal for Pope Francis. Do you think he's driven in part by resentment over the way he's been covered? He is a little controversial when it comes to the ideological debates, or coverage of the church that may not like?
Absolutely. And in fact, the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, has had a lot of experience with unfair or inaccurate news coverage. It was actually a major theme of Pope Benedict as well, who wrote beautifully about how the media can enforce this totalitarianism of conformity, and how, really big picture problems with some of our media frenzies that come into play. And so here, this Pope is following on the heels of the previous Pope. Both of them have overseen churches that have not always benefited from the most accurate coverage. And interestingly, they've received critical coverage. They're not always opposed to that. In fact, they've praised some of the critical coverage that hit them most close to home with some of their scandals, but they still understand that there are bigger issues in play.
Right. Well, no matter who you are, even one of the world's religious leaders, your own experience informs what you think about media coverage. But I find this to be actually a very nuanced indictment from this Pope. So, who's, after all, on Twitter. I mean, he doesn't just say, it's a sin to lie. He says, bringing back old stories, scandals that have died down. When he talks about one-sided reports. But some of these can be in the eye of the beholder.
Well, and it is interesting, that aspect of bringing back old stories. I do think there's a religious component here, too, an understanding that there is redemption or forgiveness for things, and that if people are always having to face some old news story, that doesn't allow that forgiveness to take place.
Right. In the web age, you may have had something terrible or done something terrible 20 years ago, but it sort of lives on forever. You Google a person's name and it comes up. And if the media exacerbate that by bringing it back, it can feel unfair, and I think that's what the Pope is kind of getting at.
What I also think is interesting here is he's not he is talking about journalists. He's talking about everybody. He'd already announced that the World Communication Day, they have some kind of annual communication day, would be focused on fake news. He announced that earlier in the year.
I don't think he technically used the term fake news, but that's what he meant.
I actually think it was in there in some of the
Donald Trump's impact.
I mean, not most recently, but a few months ago, I think there was some Vatican communications that talked about fake news, and he, again, tried to broaden it out. It's not just about people doing the specific bad stories, but how do we all talk truthfully? And truth is a very important aspect of being a good Christian. So.
Right. I mean, this is, I think, a very innovative Pope, whether you agree with him on everything or not. He uses the tools of modern communication. Even given his standing as the leader of the world's Catholics, does this have any practical effect on the news business?
Well, it would be nice. And actually, one of the things I like about it, he seems to care about the heart of the journalist. He's speaking about how it's, when you talk about someone who's sinning, that's actually something you say in love because you want them to stop sinning. He seems to care about the journalists and the bad effects of fake news. And I think that is very much in line with this Pope, his concern for the individual.
Yes, and he talks to reporters a lot, which I like, and he makes news, which I also like. Great discussion, Molly Hemingway. Merry Christmas.
To you too.
Thank you so much for being here.